Hello, this is the section on the circulatory system, which is part of chapter 22b. This section specifically, we will be talking about the blood composition. In other words, what the blood is made out of. However, before we get into depth on that, let's review what the purpose of the circulatory system is. Okay, first off, you need to have it transport oxygen from your lungs to all of your body. In return, it gives you carbon dioxide that then will come from the body back to the lungs. All nutrients that have gone through the digestive system go from the intestines out through the circulatory system to all the body cells. And any dissolved wastes, not solid wastes, but dissolved wastes, go from the body through the circulatory system to the kidneys, which will then create urine in order to remove them from the body. You also have the hormones from all the different organs, like the pancreas, the pituitary gland, your adrenal glands, etc., that make the hormones and then send them out to all of the body. If you need to write this down, you can go ahead and pause this. However, we are going to continue. Okay, long ago, the ancient Greeks, because they discovered everything, had a man named Galen who believed, as was the common belief of the time, that the heart made the blood and pumped the blood, not just pumped the blood. They had no concept otherwise of where the blood came from, since they saw the blood only in the heart and in the blood vessels. It was not until the 1600s, specifically 1628, that a doctor by the name of William Harvey actually proved that the heart and blood vessels couldn't make as much blood as there actually was in the body. They didn't know where it came from. However, they knew by this point that it was not the heart or the blood vessels making the blood. They were just moving them around. It wasn't until the 1800s, which in retrospect is not that long ago, that when they actually invented microscopes, that they were able to see that the bone marrow was where the blood cells were actually created. They knew that the marrow was important. They knew that it helped the body. In fact, they thought it fed the body. But they did not realize until that time period that the bone marrow actually was what made the blood cells. Now, when we talk about blood, a lot of people think about it as a single substance. What you do need to realize is that it's made out of a number of different things. First off, you have the liquid portion of the blood, which is plasma. This is what's actually going to be causing the flow. All of the other parts of the blood are solid, not liquid. Those parts are the different types of cells, which include, first off, erythrocytes, as most people know of as the red blood cells. Erythro means red. Cyte or cyto, remember, means cells. So these are the red cells. You have the leukocytes, which you can probably guess that leuko means white. And you have the last type, which are the thrombocytes, commonly called the platelets. And thrombo means either like a lump or a clot. Like you might think of a lump of cottage cheese that is also referred to as a clot of cottage cheese. Okay, now the plasma itself, there goes the GIF, is 90% water, as you would imagine. It has about 10% dissolved gases, including things like carbon dioxide and oxygen, as mentioned. You have minerals, things like salts, potassium, vitamin C, which actually is a mineral. You have vitamins that include D and all your B vitamins and all the list that there is. Nutrients, things that are coming from your digestive system, the hormones that were mentioned, and dissolved wastes. Those would include things that are going to become part of your urine, or even you can think about it as including the carbon dioxide. Now, the machine you see on the left, if you don't remember its name, is a centrifuge. Its purpose is to spin substances very quickly to cause them to separate out. The heaviest things will fall to the bottom, lightest to the top. Now, on the right side, you see the before image of what blood looks like before it actually is spun, and then the after. You can see the arrow is pointing to that clear liquid on the top. That is what plasma looks like. And you can tell from the proportion inside the test tube that the plasma actually makes up about half of your actual blood. It is the liquid portion. We'll talk about the other portions in a minute. Okay, the erythrocytes, the red blood cells. They actually are what are going to be transporting the oxygen and carbon dioxide. The picture on the left, showing an actual photograph of the red blood cells through the microscope, show that they kind of look like Cheerios that haven't had the hole punched all the way through. And they're the same on both sides. On the right side, you can see that after the blood has been through the centrifuge, the red blood cells are also what make up most of the solid portion of the blood. They make up about 45%. Okay, so they're primarily going to be dealing with oxygen and carbon dioxide with breathing. Okay, next there is a video from Crash Course that will explain the functioning and life of a red blood cell for your entertainment.
Because if you don't count their water content, red blood cells are 97% hemoglobin, a molecule that easily binds to and releases oxygen. It's like an oxygen sponge. Every hemoglobin molecule is really made of 8 different component molecules. 4 are a red pigment called heme, and 4 are a protein called, you guessed it, globin. Each globin is a globular polypeptide chain, hence its name, and proteins, you'll probably remember, like to bind to stuff. So each globin has its own personal ring-shaped heme molecule, and in the center of that heme is an iron atom, kind of like a cherry on top of a protein and pigment sundae. It's that iron in the center of the heme that makes our blood red. Incidentally, not all animals have red blood because not all animals use hemoglobin to move oxygen. For example, most mollusks like squids and snails have blue blood because it contains hemocyanin, a copper-rich protein pigment that turns blue when exposed to oxygen. But iron is what we're stuck with, and I have to say it's great at its job because each iron can bind with one whole oxygen molecule. And that oxygen really adds up. Since you have 4 iron atoms in every molecule of hemoglobin, and every red blood cell contains something like 250 million hemoglobin molecules, that means that each one of your tiny floppy red breath mints can grab about 1 billion molecules of oxygen. Exactly how they transfer oxygen and carbon dioxide from your tissue cells is something that we'll get into more when we talk about the respiratory system. But if you're wondering why all this hemoglobin can't simply skip the red blood cell rigmarole and just run around naked in your blood, it's because free-range hemoglobin would actually thicken the blood, making it so viscous that it would impede blood flow. This also happens to play a part in blood doping, which, stick with me, I will explain in a bit. So what does the brief but glorious 4-month life of an erythrocyte look like? Well, Remember when I said that a red blood cell doesn't have a nucleus? And maybe you thought, hey, wait a second, how can it even be a cell without a nucleus, or DNA? First of all, nice catch. But actually, erythrocytes do start off with a nucleus and DNA. They just get rid of them because their entire purpose for existing is to schlep around hemoglobin and oxygen, and they want the extra room. The whole process of forming red blood cells, called hematopoiesis, happens in your red bone marrow, which is mostly made of reticular connective tissue that's snuggled up to special capillaries called blood sinusoids. In short, the process begins with a hemocytoblast, or a specialized stem cell, which soon differentiates into an early erythroblast. Then it starts making a whole bunch of ribosomes, the organelles that manufacture proteins. And in this case, the ribosomes start cooking up tons of hemoglobin as the cell transforms into a late-stage erythroblast. When it's got enough hemoglobin, it suddenly jettisons most of its organelles, which causes the cell walls to collapse a little, giving it its biconcave, bloody breath mint shape. Now you're left with a reticulocyte, which is pretty much just an early erythrocyte that still has a little group of ribosomes left called a reticulum. So far, this whole journey has taken about 15 days. When the reticulocyte is finally just about bursting with hemoglobin, then it leaves the marrow and enters the bloodstream, and a couple of days later, when the last of the ribosomes have degraded, you've officially got yourself a mature red blood cell. And that cell travels around your body, doing its job for a few months before it gets old or damaged and needs to be replaced. Bone marrow, which is mostly made of reticular connective tissue that's snuggled up to special capillaries called blood sinusoids. In short, the process begins with a hemocytoblast, or a specialized stem cell, which